There are a lot of wrestlers who have become big stars within the industry. Just look at the likes of Roman Reigns, Randy Orton, or Triple H for evidence of this. There are even a select few who have managed to breach the mainstream, such as Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, or John Cena. That said, no one in the history of wrestling has ever been able to smash through that glass ceiling into the larger culture quite like Dwayne Johnson, going from arguably the biggest star in WWE during the late 90s and early 2000s to, at points, the highest-grossing movie star in the world over a decade later. Yes, it's been a long and storied voyage to the top for the Great One, but how did it all happen? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into his entire career journey in People's Champ, The Rock Story. Dwayne Douglas Johnson was born on May 2, 1972 in Hayward, California to parents Atta and Rocky, the latter of which, of course, was the legendary territory wrestler Soul Man Rocky Johnson, one half of the first ever African-American WWE Tag Team Champions with Tony Atlas. And you'd think this alone would make it destiny for the young Dwayne to get into the world of sports entertainment, but as if that wasn't enough, he was also a member of the iconic Anoa'i family on his mother's side, his grandfather being the High Chief Peter Maivia, the blood brother of Amatunawai Anoa'i, the patriarch of the clan. Despite this lineage and a natural gift for athletics, however, Dwayne would not grow up wanting to be a wrestler. Sure, he would enjoy watching it as a child, frequently seeing many of his kin kicking ass and taking names, but when it came to where he saw his own career going, it was very much in football, a sport he would start playing at school and would quickly discover he had a lot of skill in. That said though, school days weren't always fun and games for the future movie star, as he would find himself getting into a lot of trouble with the police during those days, getting arrested multiple times during his teenage years as he struggled to develop any roots given the fact that his family would frequently move around from place to place as a consequence of his father's job. Yes, during his formative days, Dwayne would spend time in places as far and wide as New Zealand, Hawaii, North Carolina, Connecticut, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania, all before settling in Florida after he'd accepted a football scholarship for the University of Miami. There, he would play mostly as a defensive tackle and would even win a national championship with them in 1991. This being enough so that, after graduating in 1995 with a bachelor's degree in criminology and physiology, he would move over to the Canadian Football League, where he had a brief run with the Calgary Stampeders as a linebacker. Still, for a man as driven as Dwayne was, he quickly realized that he wasn't reaching the levels he wanted to, and so, by 1996, he decided to make the jump over to the world of his father and grandfather instead, from there beginning his training in pro wrestling. And given his name and the fact that he'd taken to the whole thing like a duck to water, it didn't take long then for Pat Patterson to notice him, with him getting the youngster several tryouts with WWE, where he would perform under his real name, taking on the likes of Owen Hart, Chris Candido, and the Brooklyn Brawler at house shows. Following this, Dwayne would make a brief pit stop in Jerry Lawler's United States Wrestling Association, working under the name of Flex Cavana and winning their tag team titles with Bart Sawyer. All this before getting signed up to a full-time contract with Vince McMahon's promotion, then being sent over to Dr. Tom Pritchard to complete his training. And so, by that year's Survivor Series pay-per-view on November 17, 1996, having made his TV debut just 2 weeks earlier, Dwayne was finally ready to hit the ring for his first match. There, now being rechristened as Rocky Maivia, a combination of both his father and grandfather's names, he took part in a 4-on-4 elimination match that would see him end up becoming the sole survivor, clearly showing that the company saw a lot in his future. And as the weeks went on, the hard push for the third-generation superstar continued. Come February 13, 1997, he would even beat a young Hunter Hearst Helmsley to win the Intercontinental title for the first time. Despite this though, there was already a fan backlash growing as, with the company now being in the dawning age of the anti-hero where the likes of Stone Cold Steve Austin would become the cool thing to like, the smiling babyface theatrics of Rocky were largely seen as passé. And so this led to him getting vitriolic heat from audiences, some of whom would even go as far as to bring signs that read "Die Rocky Die," all while loudly chanting "Rocky sucks" at him. Seeing this then, WWE decided to pivot, and so, after Rocky suffered a knee injury and had to take some time out, the company began making plans to turn him heel, a decision that would become apparent on screen when he returned in August of 1997, with him from there joining up with the Nation of Domination and lashing out at those fans who had been booing him. And in the process of this, with his confidence now growing, Rocky was able to let his natural charisma come through as he began to develop the cocky and effortlessly cool side to his character that would soon go on to define him. This was also when he changed his name to The Rock and started referring to himself only in third person, using this change in attitude to help propel him back towards success as he entered into a feud with Steve Austin later that year. This program ultimately serving as a tease for what the future would hold for both men. And by the end of that first chapter, The Rock would once again be the Intercontinental Champion, from there going on to defend this belt against Ken Shamrock over the next few months. But despite Shamrock clearly being positioned as the babyface in this rivalry, by that point, the sheer charisma of his opponent was becoming too much for fans to ignore as more than a few cheers began seeping in through the chorus of boos. Cheers that would only grow over time as Rocky morphed into the most electrifying man in sports entertainment. A star in-ring athlete and arguably the greatest promo in wrestling history. One who could hold crowds everywhere in the palm of his hand, much like rock stars of the past such as Elvis Presley and Freddie Mercury. In fact, so over had he become by then that the night after WrestleMania 14, he would overthrow Farouk as the leader of the nation, from there taking up the mantle himself as the stable entered into a feud with D-Generation X, a feud that would eventually center on the rivalry between Rocky and Triple H. And this was a rivalry that would seep into real life as well, as both men had made it clear that they wanted to be the company's next top dog, and saw the other as being in their way of achieving this. Ultimately though, Rocky was just too popular to be overcome at that point, and so, even though he would lose his IC title to the Game during a ladder match at August 30th, 1998 SummerSlam, he would soon find himself being rocketed up to the main event anyway. Of course, before this could happen though, Vince McMahon would have to address the elephant in the room and turn him babyface, given that the Great One was getting monster reactions everywhere he went. By now, he'd already started referring to himself as the People's Champion some months previous to this, a moniker that was initially supposed to get heel heat for the California native. Come the autumn though, it was clear that he was indeed the favorite of the people, arguably even more so than the company's top star Steve Austin. And so, when the WWE title was vacated that autumn, with a new champion to be determined during a one-night tournament at November's Survivor Series pay-per-view, there only seemed like two reasonable options for the winner: the Rattlesnake or The Rock. What no one expected though was on that night, Rocky would win his first WWE title, but only after turning his back on the people and joining forces with the evil boss and his corporation cronies in the process, with him from there only referring to himself as the corporate champion and basking in the boos of the audience once more. Now, it might have seemed like a strange thing for WWE to turn one of their hottest stars heel right as they were reaching the next level of popularity, but there was a method to this madness, as he was being positioned for a big main event at WrestleMania 15 against the man who was fast becoming the yin to his yang, Stone Cold himself. Before this though, he would have a feud with Mick Foley at the start of the year, one which would see them trade the world title back and forth for a few months and would feature some truly iconic moments, such as the night Mick won his first WWE title on the January 4th, 1999 episode of Raw, the time the two men fought inside an empty arena during halftime heat, and the now infamous I Quit match at the Royal Rumble later that month. Once this was over though, and Foley had fully prepared his opponent for the biggest match of his life, it was down to business, as WWE began building that year's WrestleMania main event, where the company's two biggest superstars would meet in their inevitable showdown. On the night, however, it would be Austin who would get the win, and even when Rocky got another shot at the following month's Backlash, a match which was arguably better than their previous encounter, he still wouldn't be able to pin his rival to regain his lost gold. Still, failure wasn't a word in the Great One's vocabulary, and so, quickly bouncing back from this then, he gave fans what they'd been begging for when he finally turned babyface again the next night, reigniting his feud with Triple H in the process as he started making it his aim to take out the corporation one by one. And now formally a good guy again, The Rock's popularity swelled to even greater heights than it had before. He had excellent matches with the likes of The Undertaker over the course of the first half of the year, while also continuing to prove that he was the best promo in the business, becoming an absolute catchphrase machine as he gave us the likes of "laying the smackdown," "just bring it," and "it doesn't matter," all while the millions and millions of his fans chanted along with every word. By that summer, he even got the distinction of having the company's newest show, SmackDown, be named after one of his catchphrases. And it was on SmackDown, as well as Raw, that he would form an unlikely bond with his old rival Mick Foley, the two going on to form the Rock and Sock Connection, probably the best odd couple team in WWE history, as the effortlessly cool Rocky would bounce off the weird and freaky Foley perfectly. It took a while for Mick to endear himself to his far more stylish partner, of course, but once he did, it was magic at every step. In fact, their now famous "This Is Your Life" segment on the August 30th episode of Raw, which saw Mick regale the Great One with supposed figures from his past, would become the highest ever rated segment in the show's history at that time. And from there, the two would even have 3 separate runs as tag team champions together, holding those belts on and off until October of 1999 as fans cheered them along at every step. They would only really lose them, in fact, when the hardcore legend, feeling the wear and tear of his years of ultra-high-risk style, began readying himself for retirement. On top of that, the fact that Steve Austin was about to spend a year out of action so he could go get neck surgery left a face of the company-shaped hole that the People's Champion was only too happy to pick up, becoming the undisputed top star of WWE throughout 2000. A year which to this day is still considered by many to be the absolute peak of not just Vince McMahon's promotion, but of wrestling in general. And of course, with the most eyeballs that had ever watched the show now firmly tuned in each week, The Rock's magnetic charisma shone through screens around the world, this turning him into a full-blown mainstream phenomenon as he made guest appearances on the likes of That 70s Show and Star Trek Voyager, while also hosting Saturday Night Live and even becoming the subject of a song by Wyclef Jean. He became a pop culture icon, in fact, as, even more so than Steve Austin and Hulk Hogan, the California boy became the public face of wrestling. This all helped his continued upward momentum in the ring too, as by April 30th's Backlash pay-per-view, he would finally be able to pin Triple H to become WWE Champion once more, with him from there defending this belt against a who's who over that summer that included the likes of Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, The Undertaker, Kane, and even the McMahons themselves. In fact, during a year when Steve Austin was gone from action, it was The Rock, and to a lesser extent The Game, that ended up carrying the company on their backs, this proving that when given the ball to run with, the People's Champion could not be stopped. Even when Austin returned to action in the autumn, the Great One's progress wasn't stalled, and by this point, there was even a legitimate argument to be had about who was the real top star in the promotion. That was why it felt inevitable then that the two would meet once more, with this eventually happening at April 1st, 2001's WrestleMania 17, the show that's still to this day regarded by many to be the greatest ever put on by any company. And a big part of this was the perfect main event that saw arguably the two biggest stars in the industry's history at that point battling it out to see once and for all who was the best. Of course, anyone who was watching at the time will remember that, while The Rock went into the show as the champion, he left a loser after the Rattlesnake had done the unthinkable and aligned himself with Vince McMahon in order to wrangle the title away from his opponent. In hindsight, the heel turn was a decision that's been credited as the reason for the boom period ending, and while it was a large part of it, it also hurt that it was the point when Rocky first began getting interest from Hollywood, with this pulling his focus away from wrestling more and more in the years that followed, as movies gradually became his priority. After WrestleMania 17, in fact, he would take some time off to go and film his first major role as the Scorpion King in The Mummy 2. And so successful was this role for him that just a year later he would get his own spin-off, unsurprisingly named The Scorpion King, as his momentum continued. That wasn't to say he was done with wrestling altogether though, because he would have a few more prominent runs left in him. The first of which would begin when he came back from his beatdown at the hands of Austin and McMahon to rescue Team WWE during the Invasion storyline in mid-2001, positioning himself then as the captain of the New York promotion in their ongoing war against the villainous alliance of WCW and ECW. During this time, he would even become the WCW champion on 2 separate occasions, beating Booker T at that year's SummerSlam to start his first reign, and then Chris Jericho on the November 5th episode of Raw to start his second. And as if that wasn't enough, it would ultimately be Rocky who would save the company when he got the winning pinfall over the Rattlesnake during the winner-take-all match at that year's Survivor Series, this formally ending the invasion and leaving WWE as the ultimate victors. From there, the People's Champion set his sights on becoming the first undisputed champion, and though he would ultimately fail to do this, he did get quite the consolation prize when, in February of 2002, the NWO came into the company and immediately set about injecting everything in their sights with a lethal dose of poison. Part of this takeover included Hulk Hogan coming out to do a promo on the February 18th episode of Raw, intent on positioning himself as the top dog once again after having been away for the last 9 years. Of course, during those 9 years, things had changed a lot, and now, the Hulkster was arguably no longer the biggest star in the industry. That's why the Great One felt the need to hit the ring and confront him, from there challenging him to have a dream match at the upcoming WrestleMania 18, one which Hogan accepted with glee. And so, just like that, maybe the most important bout in wrestling history had been booked, the biggest mainstream star of the past versus the biggest mainstream star of the present. Given how anticipated the whole thing was then, the actual contest had a lot to live up to, and had it been 2 lesser performers in the ring that night, it could have very easily fallen flat on its face. Luckily though, Rocky and Hogan were not 2 lesser performers, and so, when the time for the bell came, they played the crowd like a fiddle, doing very little, but speaking volumes with what they did do. In terms of a sustained match-long crowd reaction, it's probably still the most intense atmosphere ever seen at a wrestling show. And though nostalgia did lead many in the crowd to cheer for Hogan that night, and even a few to boo Rocky, by the end, it would be the People's Champion who would get the pinfall, the torch having been firmly passed over to him in a truly once-in-a-lifetime moment. After that, the budding Hollywood star hung around for a little while longer before going off to shoot his next movie, The Rundown. During this time, before he left, he would be the first overall pick during the company's inaugural draft, and would even become undisputed champion for a period after beating Kurt Angle and The Undertaker in a hugely underrated triple threat match at July 21, 2002's Vengeance. Following this, he would put the incoming Brock Lesnar over strong at the next month's SummerSlam pay-per-view, making the Beast look like an absolute killer in the process during a Match of the Year contender, as he proved that he was still willing to do the honors for others whenever required. Despite this selfless attitude though, by then, the constant sabbaticals to go and film movies had left some fans to start souring on the Great One, with the perception beginning to build that he was abandoning them for the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. That was largely why, when he returned to the ring on January 30th, 2003, he'd once again morphed into a heel, this time portraying himself as Hollywood Rock, an iteration that many, years removed, now regard to be his best. Maybe it was because he once again truly felt like the cocky performer he had been back when he first got over, coming out to the ring with an arrogant, toothy smile and dark sunglasses, performing special rock concerts where he would serenade everyone with his own hits such as SmackDown Hotel, all while mocking the fans in attendance. It was a complete revitalization of the character, and it propelled him towards much success as he would not only beat Hulk Hogan for a second straight time during the rematch at February 23rd's No Way Out, but he would also finally get that elusive win over Steve Austin during the third in their trilogy at WrestleMania 19 a month later, the very match that ended up being the Rattlesnake's swan song from the ring. And as if retiring Stone Cold wasn't enough, the Hollywood star continued to prove he was a class act and someone who would give back to those lower down on the card when he had a mini program with the Hurricane, even going as far as to lose to him on the March 10th episode of Raw. Following this, he had a match with the incoming Goldberg, with the Great One coming out on the losing end of that bout too, as he prepared to once again leave and go film his next movie, Walking Tall. Throughout the remainder of the year, he would make sporadic appearances with the company, however, returning once again as a babyface and eventually setting up a tag match at WrestleMania 20, where he would reunite with his old Rock and Sock tag team partner Mick Foley to take on Ric Flair, Batista, and Randy Orton of Evolution. And that, as it turned out, aside from a couple more cameo appearances, would be his last major appearance with WWE for almost a decade, as in late 2004, his contract would lapse and the company would neglect to sign him to a new one, with them at the time blaming this on an administrational error. Of course, the idea that Vince McMahon simply forgot to re-sign The Rock is laughable, and it seems far more likely that there was some beef between the two parties, particularly as by then, the People's Champion was becoming such a big movie star that he was starting to outshine the brand of WWE itself. Removing himself almost entirely from the world of wrestling then and focusing all of his energies on his film career instead, Rocky started going by his real name of Dwayne Johnson once again as he began building on his already impressive portfolio of box office hits. But while many of his more comedic leading early roles had made him a legitimate star, such as his performances in kids' movies like Race to Witch Mountain and The Tooth Fairy, it wasn't until he got the role of Luke Hobbs in the Fast and Furious franchise that he fully solidified his position as a modern-day Arnold Schwarzenegger-level action hero, and at points, the biggest box office attraction in the entire movie industry. That's what made it so special and so unexpected then when, after 7 years of having been away from WWE, he was announced as the surprise guest host of WrestleMania 27 on the February 14, 2011 episode of Raw. Coming out to a monster reaction and then cutting a promo happened, these comments had led to real-life heat between the two men as Dwayne felt disrespected by them. Capitalizing on this then, the company began using it to set up an eventual match between the two, something which was solidified when, at WrestleMania 27, Rocky laid out Cena with a rock bottom and cost him the win, this causing Big Match John to make a challenge to the Great One the next night on Raw, face him one-on-one at the following year's WrestleMania 28. Yes, it was a unique marketing strategy to book the main event of WrestleMania 1 year in advance, but it worked, because when The Rock came back for a tune-up match at November 20th Survivor Series, teaming with his future opponent to take on The Miz and R-Truth, the show did monster box office buys. And if there was any doubt about how the eventual singles match would work out, WrestleMania 28 made even more money, becoming the best-drawing WWE pay-per-view in history, as, in an echo of his showdown with Hulk Hogan a decade prior, Rocky faced off in a past versus present dream match which, to the surprise of many, saw the Hollywood star pick up the win. Of course, the reason for this soon became apparent as whispers began going around that WWE were planning to book a rematch the following year, using the intervening time to tell the story of John Cena finding redemption after having suffered the biggest loss of his career. This did slightly dampen the idea of the original match having been promoted as once in a lifetime, but nevertheless, the return bout was always destined to be another huge success, especially when the People's Champion once again became the WWE Champion after beating CM Punk for the title at the 2013 Royal Rumble, making this second encounter between the two faces of the company for all the gold. And in the natural conclusion to this story, when the two faced off one more time at WrestleMania 29 on April 7, 2013, Cena finally got his redemption when he pinned the Great One in the middle of the ring to regain his gold and his pride in the process. As of the time of this video's recording though, that would mark Rocky's last real match in a WWE ring, something no doubt partially decided by the fact that he injured himself during it, tearing multiple tendons and causing his latest movie Hercules' shooting schedule to have to get delayed as a result. Given the fact that this would have cost the studio a lot of money, it's understandable why most producers are now less happy to have Dwayne wrestle matches, and it's meant that, aside from one sort of impromptu match with Eric Rowan at WrestleMania 32 that lasted all of 6 seconds, whenever he's returned since, it's been in a non-wrestling role, either showing up to deliver one of his trademark promos, inducting his father and grandfather into the WWE Hall of Fame, or helping out the likes of Ronda Rousey or his cousin Roman Reigns. Outside of the ring, though, his movie career has only continued to go from strength to strength, with his continued roles in the Fast and the Furious franchise even leading to him and Jason Statham getting their own spin-off, Hobbs and Shaw, in 2019. As well as that, he's also done multiple films for Disney, having feature roles in hits such as Moana and The Jungle Cruise, while also starring in a number of buddy comedies with his frequent collaborator Kevin Hart. And continuing to build his empire even further from here, he's moved into film production, creating his own company, 7 Bucks Production, and helping to fund projects such as the Jumanji reboot and his next major upcoming role set in the DC universe Black Adam, and oftentimes foil to the likes of Superman and Shazam. On top of this, he's developed and starred in a number of TV shows, such as Ballers, The Titan Games, and Young Rock, the latter of which tells the story of his younger years before he was the most electrifying man in entertainment. All that while meanwhile, back in the world of sports, he's recently purchased the XFL, with him now planning on doing what Vince McMahon was never able to do by turning it into a legitimate force in the world of football. But the question most wrestling fans will continue to ask is, will we ever see him in the ring again? Well, up until recently that might have felt unlikely, but given recent rumors that have been going around, it seems like he's actually getting set to make yet another triumphant return, this time supposedly to face his cousin and current face of the WWE, Roman Reigns. In fact, many expect this match will take place next year at WrestleMania 38, but there's been no confirmation yet as of the time of this video's recording, so we'll have to wait and see if it happens. Whether it does or not though, The Rock's legacy is secured as one of the greatest, if not the greatest professional wrestler of all time. Really, if we were talking about box office draw and mainstream success, the only two people who could challenge him are Hulk Hogan and Steve Austin. At a time when the industry was at its hottest, the People's Champion had audiences everywhere glued to their screens, and he's proven in the years since that no matter how long he stays away for, he'll always be just as relevant whenever he chooses to come back. But in-ring success aside, he's also been able to break out of the wrestling bubble in a way that no one else before him has. At this point, there's a whole generation of people who don't even associate him with being a wrestler anymore, in fact. To them, he's not The Rock, he's Dwayne Johnson, the biggest movie star in the world. And while for wrestling fans he'll always be their guy, for the larger culture, that will ultimately be his legacy, as one of the greatest entertainers of his generation, someone who's managed to completely dominate Hollywood and who doesn't look likely to give up this role anytime soon based on what he's got lined up over the next few years. So with that in mind then, we should all get used to many more years of seeing him electrifying our screens because he's only gonna get bigger and better from here, whether it be in football, wrestling, business, or movies. And that's a fact if you smell what The Rock is cooking. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram and Twitter. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.